Hi, I'm Joel Francich from Twilio. What is Twilio? Twilio makes it easy for you, the web developer, to make and receive phone calls and send and receive SMS messages, all through a simple RESTful API. We have over 80 carrier partners around the world, provide you service to over 180 countries, and allow you to instantly provision phone numbers in over 44 countries. We've raised $33 million from a range of investors, which includes 500 startups, Bessemer, and Union Square Ventures. In this guest lecture, I'll be talking about how Twilio works, our engineering culture, developer evangelism, and I'll be showing you how Twilio allows you to easily add voice and SMS capabilities to your application. Here's a little bit about me. At Twilio, I work as a developer evangelist. I also help organize a hacker party called Super Happy Dev House. And before joining Twilio, I worked as a developer evangelist at Microsoft. And a fun fact about me is that I once helped set up a squid proxy for a small African country. So before we get started, I wanted to give you a picture here, which is a good mental model for how Twilio works. It's going to help explain what it is that Twilio does. The basics are is that over here on the right, you've got your code running on a web server, which is communicating via HTTP with Twilio. And then Twilio will then take the responses from your application or the requests that you send to it, and then act on those and allow your application to communicate over the telephone network to things like cell phones or landlines, or allow you to communicate to people using mobile devices like iOS or Android, or to web applications. A little bit of history on Twilio. We were founded in 2007 by Jeff Lawson, Evan Cook, and John Wolthius. Evan and John have extensive experience with writing distributed systems, and Jeff is a serial entrepreneur. Before becoming Twilio's CEO, he was at AWS and was also the CTO at StubHub. We've raised $33 million from a wide range of investors, including the ones that you see here. We have over 130 employees. And the thing that really excites me the most about Twilio is our history. We were founded in 2007. 2008, we launched with Twilio Voice. Now this is the part of Twilio that allows you to communicate with the voice networks via a simple API. And then 2 years later, we added Twilio SMS, which is an extension to our API that allowed people to easily send and receive SMS messages. And then here's where things really started to pick up. So in 2011, we added a product called Twilio Client. And Twilio Client is what allows you to communicate with mobile devices like iOS and Android, or with web browsers. We also added the ability for people to send SMS messages to and from SMS shortcodes. These are the 5- and 6-digit codes that you'll see sometimes on advertisements and things like that. Then last year, we added a whole bunch of features. The ones that I list here are just a fraction of them, but they included global SMS, which meant that we took care of all the complexities of reliably delivering SMS messages to over 180 countries. Part of that was enabling people to send Unicode characters to all of the countries that we support. That was a really cool problem for us to fix, because different carriers and different providers will use different encodings for how characters are encoded and sent via SMS messages. And so what we did is we went and found all the combinations of those different encodings and figured out how to translate reliably from one encoding to another, and now allows you to easily send things with characters in different alphabets, as well as send fun things like emoji. Last year, we also added WebRTC support to Twilio Client, which means that on browsers like Firefox and Chrome, you don't have to use Flash to make voice calls through a web browser. Now, before we get into the details of Twilio, I think that really the best way to show you what Twilio does is to not just step through some slides, but actually open up a terminal and write some code in it. So that's what I'm going to do now. So here we are inside of my Twilio account. This is pretty much what your account will look like when you log into it. What you're going to want to keep in mind is the location of your account SID and your auth token. The auth token here has this little lock on it to let you know that this is very much like a password and you don't want people to be able to see it because with that they can make phone calls with your account and send SMS messages with your account, and you really don't want people to be able to do that without your permission. So to get started here, the first thing that we're going to do is buy a number. When you have any application, the way that people are going to be talking to that application is through a phone number. So the first thing you do is buy the number. And since I live in San Francisco, I'm going to look for a number in the 415 area code. And now for the purposes of this demo, can take any old number here. Let's pick this one. So I'm going to buy this number and go ahead here and set it up. So what you'll see here are these two request URLs. Now if you remember the picture I showed you, the kind of mental model for how Twilio works, you remember that Twilio will be communicating with your application through HTTP. This is how we do it. This is one of the ways that we do it. So here you'll see a request URL called voice request URL. This is the URL that Twilio will make a request to when you have an incoming call. And over here is the URL that Twilio will make a request to when you have an incoming SMS. Now in both of those use cases, whatever that URL responds with is actions that Twilio will take with that voice call or that SMS. So in this demo, let's set up a handler for this SMS here. So let's go over to our terminal. I'm going to SSH to my demo machine, cd into the Twilio directory, run Emacs on mook demo.xml. Now the first thing you're going to do when you respond is tell Twilio, hey, I've got a response. And then in here is where you give Twilio the things that you want it to do with that incoming call or SMS. So in this case, I'm getting an SMS, so I want to respond with another SMS. I'm going to say, thanks for watching my MOOC demo. Close off the SMS tag, close off the response tag, save the file. And now if I go over into Firefox, I can open up a tab here and go to twilio.joel@france.com/mocdemo.xml. And there you can see, thanks for watching my MOOC demo. So I can take this URL here, put it in here, hit Save Changes. And so now if you want to follow along while you're watching this, pull out your phone and send a text message to the number that I just set up here. Even though I'm recording it, now I'm going to leave this number up so that you can see what I just did. So pull out your phone, open up your text messaging application, and send a text message to area code 415-749-9322. Again, that's 415-749-9322. And I'm going to send a message to it saying test. So there we go. Now I'm going to copy this phone number here, so I'm going to use that later. And so what you should have just gotten now is a response saying, thanks for watching my MOOC demo. So there you go. It's an example of setting up an SMS response. Let's do something a little bit more fancy than that. Let's show you how we can do outbound requests. So for that, let's go to my local machine. And we're going to use the REST API here. So we have a bunch of libraries in different languages like C#, Java, PHP, Ruby, but I use Python. So let's start that up. So now the first thing you're going to do whenever you're using a client library, no matter what language you do, is import the library. So here I'm going to say from twilio.rest, import Twilio REST client. I'm going to instantiate a client, saying client equals Twilio REST client. And then let's find out what I texted in. Normally, if you were watching this live, I'd be able to see all your responses, but we haven't yet added the ability to receive text messages from the future. So for now, we'll have to just deal with text messages from the past. List. And so here's a list of SMS messages. That's a whole bunch of them. And the reason I got that long list is because I didn't filter anything. So let's filter it here and say I only want messages that were sent to that number. And there's just one response there. That's what I sent. But let's do something with this. So we'll say for each message in the list of messages that I got. Well, first I got to say assign the response to messages. And then say for each message in messages, print message.body. So there we go. I sent in test, and there it is. Well, I've shown you how to do SMS stuff, but I haven't shown you any voice things. So let's do that now. Let's say client.calls.create. And who should I call? Well, let's call me back. So I'm going to say message.from, who this was from. And this is going to say create a call to message from the phone number that I set up, and the URL is going to be a URL that I've set up before, http music.xml. So I'm going to play some music. This is music from one of my favorite soundtracks, movie soundtracks. So let's do that here. So I'm going to turn up the ringer on my phone, and the call should be coming in just any minute now. So there's the call coming in. Let's answer it and put it on speakerphone. So there you go. It's a track from the remix of the Tron soundtrack, one of my favorite movie soundtracks. Now, for those of you following along at home, if you want to call into that number, I'm going to set it up right now so that you can do that. I'm going to take this music XML here and go back in here, paste that in there, replace everything else, go in here and click Save. And so if you want to see what that's like, just to make sure that you convince yourself that that really works, you can take this number here and give it a call. This is the number to call. You can hit pause now and dial that and check that out. Otherwise, that's it. So thanks, everyone. And we're back to the presentation now. Man, I love giving that demo, especially in a live audience. I believe that we got some video of the people in the live classroom where I did that live, seeing what that looks like. And so you can kind of get a feeling for what that might be like in a live audience. Well, one of the reasons why I like doing that as a live demo is I kind of feel like a magician, and maybe not quite like Penn and Teller, maybe a little bit more like Joe Bluth. And it reminds me of this quote, not from Joe, but from Arthur C. Clarke. So Arthur C. Clarke is a well-known science fiction author, and he has this quote that I think about a lot when I'm doing this demo. The quote is, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And I think that we see that a lot. You'll notice a lot of times when you're interacting with technology and you show it to someone who maybe hasn't seen it before, they're like, wow, how does that work? And the cool thing about being a programmer is that you actually, there's no stigma on telling people how it works, and that's what I'm going to be doing now. I'm going to be telling you how we allow you to easily use telephony. So let's get started. Before I get into the how Twilio works, I'm going to talk about sort of the history of where things used to be and why you haven't been able to do this until about 5 years ago. And the reason for that is that this is what telephony equipment used to look like. It's this big piece of hardware that you'd have to buy. And if you wanted to add phone systems to your company, you'd have to buy a piece of equipment like this. This is called a PBX. Find a place to put it, usually in a closet somewhere, and then plug a bunch of wires into it and configure it. And anytime you wanted to add any capabilities to it, you'd actually have to plug hardware into another piece of hardware. So you see these like cards here that are plugged into it. On the left there, we've got some things that if you zoom in, you can see like there's a tone detector, and then the cards that are on the right are like analog cards. So that's the way things were for quite a long time. More recently, people have basically taken that hardware and turned that into software and made systems that were software PBXs. And there's two open source projects that do that. There's FreeSwitch and there's Asterisk. And Asterisk is kind of what I'm showing you here. This is this is what it would take to set up a asterisk PBX. This thing here that you see on the left there, this is what 26 feet of documentation looks like, shrunk down to fit on a slide. Then over here you'll see this is a sample from that, and this is just a bunch of settings that you've got to put in. It's a lot of like things that are opaque or acronyms you don't really understand, and you kind of follow along and it works, but you don't really know how it works or what you did. And if all you really wanted to do was send out an SMS message or make a phone call, it's sometimes not worth it to spend several hours to get this thing set up if all you really want to do is just make a call. And I think a lot of people were just like, forget it. Well, now you can do something just like this. With these lines of code that you see here in the bold, that's all it takes to make a call like you see over here or send an SMS message. This is really all you'd need. You'd have to make sure that you were using the right account, SID, and auth token from your dashboard like I showed you earlier. This is all it takes. So how does this work? Let's dive in a little bit deeper. So you remember that mental model I showed you, or that picture, the simplified diagram. This is a little bit more in depth, kind of what's going on. So at the top here, we've got your applications, the developer applications, the stuff, that code that you write that's communicating with Twilio through HTTP. And then what Twilio does is, based on what thing that you want to do, will take care of the nitty-gritty details of it. So let's say you want to send an SMS. We'll send it out via SMPP, take care of those character encodings for you, deal with all the complexities of that. You want to make a voice call. We will find the right place to route it out, deal with all the different codecs and types of audio encoding schemes. And you don't have to know that we're using SIP, but that's what's going on. And then for things like buying a number, you can instantly buy a number through us. We have a large pool of numbers and allow you to instantly provision one of those numbers. And that makes it easier than the way it used to be, where you'd have to buy a block of numbers ahead of time or send an email to somebody or call someone up on the phone. All of that is abstracted away through a simple-to-use API. So now let's dive in a little bit deeper. Talk a little bit more about what's kind of going on underneath the hood. And for this example, I'm going to talk about how the voice part of Twilio works. So you remember that we have like two types of ways to interact with Twilio. One of them is sort of on an incoming basis when someone makes a call in and then your app gets a request. And then there's the outbound stuff where you tell Twilio to act on your behalf to make a call from one of your numbers to someone else. So let's take a look at what it'd be like in the first scenario. So let's say someone was to call your Twilio number. They'd come in here from the left-hand side, hit our call routing stack. That call would usually come into Twilio via a protocol called SIP. We take care of demodulating that audio. And then when that call came through, we'd go in through our cache. If that number had already had instructions on how to act and had been told, hey, do the same thing for the next hour whenever someone calls that number, then we would just act on that immediately. Otherwise, we'd go out to your application and say, hey, how should we handle this call? So let's say that your application then responded with, hey, that incoming call, I want you to read it out something. So the request would go back. We would process that TWIML, the XML language that you send back to us. That'd go out to our text-to-speech service, which would then take that text, turn it into audio, and then feed it out back through the SIP connection to the user, and then hang up. Now let's take the other scenario, like the one in my demo where I showed you how to make an outbound call to everyone who texted in and played them all music. For that scenario, start out here sort of on the internet in this ever-present cloud that people use to represent the internet. The call comes in through the REST API, goes into our call origination service, which will then make the outbound call. Once that call connects, it goes in through the same type of flow as the incoming call, where we gave it a URL, say follow this URL when that person calls in. In the case of the demo I used a play command, which then caused this to go out and fetch the URL that I told it to play, give it to a service to turn that file into audio, play that audio, and then hang up once it's done. So that's how that works. It's about as deep into the stack as I think is practical. Any more detail than that, and I start getting frustrated at how the phone system's implemented or confused at all the different acronyms. So let's talk about engineering culture. Talk about what makes it possible for us to deliver services that make it really easy to use something like the phone system. And there's a lot of different ways to talk about culture, but the way that I really like talking about Twilio's engineering culture is through the lens of our 9 values. And so these values are like the public manifestation of the ways that we've all agreed to interact with each other and with the outside world. My favorite one is no shenanigans. So this idea of don't ever do something that you would describe as shenanigans. And so this comes up when we're talking about like, hey, how come we don't do something in this particular way? The response will invariably come back in one of these, in the form of one of these values, but I love it when someone says, well, to do it that way would be shenanigans. And usually when I hear that, I'm like, yep, that's right, actually, good call. But in the case of engineering, I'm going to focus on these 2 values here. So think at scale and draw the owl. So starting with draw the owl. If you were paying attention to memes a couple years ago, this probably sounds familiar. If you don't know this, then you can find these slides and click on the link and see what that's all about. But the real core thing here, thing to remember is ship it. That's really what if there was one small way of describing what the culture is in our Twilio engineering group, it's ship it. And here's why. As we've grown, we've really needed to start thinking at scale. We're at the point now where we've got data centers all over the world, have thousands of servers, over a half a petabyte of data. Not only that, we deploy to production. We deploy code to production several times a day, and we do that with 0 maintenance window, meaning we don't ever drop any request. So unlike some web properties where it's not a big deal if a small percentage of the requests that come in get dropped because the web browser will just retry, we can't afford to lose somebody's SMS or phone call. And not only that, also unlike a lot of the typical web stacks that you'll see that have something like a proxy service at the front, which will hand off requests to an application server, which talks to maybe a database server and a caching server. We've got hundreds of backend services that all need to get orchestrated to do something like make a call or send an SMS. And so the way that we do that, some of the ways that we do that, I'm going to give a couple examples. The first of which is in dealing with these thousands of servers, we have a product that we call box config. This is an internal tool that we've written about. You can read about it online if you look up slides from Twilio on SlideShare. You can see there's some talks from Evan Cook, our CTO, on how we've got what box config does. But the basics for you is that a box config will automatically configure those servers and services for us. So it allows us at the very core to instantly turn on a whole Twilio instance in a new data center, but not only that, it will set up individual machines with individual services, monitor the health of those services, and if it sees something getting overloaded, it will scale up more services so that the load can get spread out. If it sees that something's underutilized, it might scale it back down so that we can save resources and money. And if it sees that something's failing, it'll let us know or take preventative action automatically. Another thing that we do is we have a continuous integration system set up so that all of our code is tested. Whenever somebody checks code into our repository, it gets run through a barrage of tests to make sure that there aren't any regressions, meaning that we only make a mistake once. And after that mistake gets made, it gets turned into a test, and we know that that particular case will never come up again. And then lastly, one of the things I wanted to talk about was a concept that I feel is pretty important no matter what type of service you're building, and it's this idea of using account flags or feature flags as they're called. So if you've ever used, if you're a person who's using Twitter or Facebook, you'll probably have noticed that your friends might have access to a new feature or capability that you don't quite have access to yet, and then eventually you also get that as well. And what that is a feature flag. What's happening is that Facebook or Twitter are deploying this new feature slowly on a user by user basis. And the really cool thing about that is that allows you to make sure that that new code that you've written actually works in the first place in a live production system, and then secondly that it actually works as intended, that it makes sense to people when they're using it, that it's doing what you intended it to do, and then lastly, it allows you to slowly increase the amount of people that are using it to make sure that you don't have any scalability issues or performance issues, because what works on a couple of servers might not work across your whole database or across your whole set of servers. And a kind of a case of that, another product that we've written is a thing called Shadow. So when we're releasing new code, you want to make sure that it works. And something that we've written is a product that allows us to make sure that when we're transitioning, not just adding new features like we do with the count flags, but when we're entirely replacing a certain code base with some different code, we want to make sure that that works in the exact same way. So the way that Shadow works is that a request will come in to our server, to Shadow. Shadow will then take that request and give it to an existing service. So in our case, we transitioned a PHP code base to a Python code base. So the request would come into Shadow, hit our PHP code base, and then a copy of that request would get sent to the Python instance of that code. Then both of those instances would respond. The PHP response would get sent back to the customer, and then a comparison between the response from the PHP server and the Python server, they'd be diffed against each other to see if there was any difference. The cool thing about this is that we were able to find things that we would have never imagined would have ever been an issue. My favorite example of this is when we were in the middle of this transition, we would have a single byte that would be off. Maybe 300 bytes in the response, and one would be off. And actually, with ASCII, it was probably even just one bit that was off, and that was a lowercase t ended up being a uppercase t. And what happened is that in PHP, a true value is lowercase t RUE, and in Python, it's an uppercase t lowercase RUE. And to find that out by hand, looking at two diffs side by side, if you were doing this as a human, everything else would have looked exactly right. All the brackets would have been in the right places, the quotes, but that one little t could have messed up certain client implementations, or maybe somebody had a code written with a hard-coded string that was all lowercase characters. And that's just something that we don't want to do. The other case where this came in extremely useful was when we transitioned our billing system to a new billing system. We wanted to make sure that the new billing system charged the exact same prices and behaving the exact same way. And Shadow allowed us to make that transition with zero downtime and be very confident that everything was being billed the exact same rate. And so we didn't actually transition the billing system over until we had spent several weeks without having any errors at all. The other cool thing about Shadow is that it's open sourced. So this is part of a suite of software that we have online. If you go to twilio.com/open-source, you can see a whole list of all this with links to the GitHub repos where you can see this. So we already talked about Shadow. A couple of other things here that I think would be useful to anybody watching this video is Flask RESTful. So if you also use Python for programming and you use the Python framework, Flask RESTful is an extension to the Flask framework that allows you to easily turn your Python code into a well-behaving REST API. And so this was the result of a bunch of learning that we had internally around how to best make the REST API, and this is a library that allowed us to make an API very easily without having to add in a whole bunch of boilerplate. Next, we've got Stashboard, which is a service dashboard, similar to what you might see when you're looking at the status of something like Salesforce or AWS, where it's usually just a bunch of green dots, and then when a service is having issues, might turn yellow or red. If you're building a service where you need to communicate parts of the health of your service to your users, this is something that you can get from us for free and don't have to do any of that coding yourself. In addition, Stashboard also allows your users to sign up to be alerted via SMS or email whenever one of your services is having an issue. And lastly, for everybody watching this, the next time you go to use a REST API, perhaps the Twilio REST API, Open up your browser and type in hurl.it. This is a service not unlike curl that allows you to make a HTTP request and see what the response is, all through a web interface. So, perhaps you've seen curl before and been a little bit turned off by the command line interface. Hurl is definitely something that you want to use, or say you don't have access to a terminal somewhere, or you want to show a friend how HTTP works. Hurl is a great way to do that. Now, in addition to our engineering culture, another aspect of the culture at Twilio that's really important is this idea of developer evangelist. So now I'm on a team of people who do this full time, but it's a core part of the DNA at Twilio. So it's not just the developer evangelist who focus on making a service that is buying for developers. We even have a full team of developers this team is called Developer Experience, and their whole job is to also think about this in a more inward type of way, where the developer experience focuses on stuff internally. The evangelist, people like me, do things like record this video and go out to hackathons. It's also a core part of our DNA because our first hire was also our first evangelist. Danielle was the first person, the first non-founder employee at Twilio, and she's the one who built our evangelist program. Now, if you're wondering, hey, what's this? What's the whole deal? Give me a summary. Well, here's the summary of kind of what you can think about developer evangelism. When you're making something for developers, exposing it through an API, you can think about it as self-service biz dev. This is a really easy way of thinking about, like, what's the point of an API? The cool thing about an API is you don't need to have people to talk to other people to do an integration between two services. All you need is to publish an API, and people can do that integration on their own. I see this all the time. I love going to an event, seeing someone send out an SMS, and be like, wow, I never thought of this particular use case for using SMS, or how you could use a phone in this way. And never heard of them before because I didn't have to. I didn't need to know that there was somebody out there doing this. All they had to do was use our API. But when you're dealing with APIs, that's not the only thing that you gotta keep in mind, that you just throw something out there and people will use it. These are some other things that you should focus on if you're building an API or really any type of thing for a developer to use. So the first thing to keep in mind is that you want to have a clear value proposition. It's got to be extremely easy for someone to understand what it is that you do. And it sounds obvious, but that's not always the case. So with Twilio, Twilio makes it really easy to send and receive text messages, make and receive phone calls. And if you're doing something for a developer, make sure that you have a value proposition that's equally as clear. You've got to make sure that it's easy to sign up, that it's really fast. Developers tend to be impatient, and whichever solution they can sign up for first will often be the one that people will pick. In addition to that, you want to have a simple API, meaning it's got to be consistent with itself, be kind of obvious what you need to do. If you already know how to use one part, it should be pretty obvious on how to do something different. And then you want to have efficient quick starts. So what this means is, for any type of service or API or product that you're giving to a developer, there will be common use cases, things that everyone's going to want to do with your service. For that, you want to have a documentation on just the bare minimum that you need to do to make a phone call, for example, or send an SMS, and give people code they can just copy and paste and do that without having to really dig into the intricacies of your API. And for those who have a use case that maybe doesn't fall into a quick start, you want to make sure that when they go into your documentation, it's very easy to find, that it makes a lot of sense, and that it just gives them the bare minimum that they need to know to figure out what something does, what it doesn't do, and how to interact with it. The next piece here might be a little bit controversial, but Twilio, we believe that the HTTP basic auth is a better way of having an API versus using OAuth, because this allows someone to easily hit the ground running with your API. With just the account sit in auth token, you can make a request via curl. You can use any programming language which can make an HTTP request, and you don't have to worry about dancing back and forth with HTTP requests and doing OAuth. And then lastly, it needs to be very easy for people to debug your API. So a thing we see often is somebody will miss a character when they're typing in their request URL. And they call the number and it doesn't work. And they're wondering why. Well, if you just go into your account and you click on logs and then errors, you'll see that there maybe your server gave a 404 because it didn't know how to fetch that URL. So now that's an easy way of figuring out what was wrong with your app. You didn't have to figure out where your web server stored its logs or if it was logging at all or what's going on. The high-level summary of this, no matter what you're doing, keep in mind this one key thing. It should take no more than 5 minutes for a developer to perform a useful task using your API for the first time. I would even say that even if you're not developing an API for someone to use, you as a developer should expect this of people and services, of other services that you're using and software that you're using. Especially when you're working for a startup. In the early days of a startup, your time is an extremely, extremely valuable resource, and you should not be spending time doing something that isn't core to your business, and should expect that people not waste your time expecting you to jump through unnecessary hoops. Hero making is another way that we think about what we do at Twilio. At Twilio, we allow people to easily add in the voice and SMS capabilities, and often the people using us, that isn't a thing that's core to their business. It's something that they're adding on. They really don't want to be spending all their time thinking about telephony. They want to be spending time thinking about making their service even better and better. And when somebody is able to easily add these capabilities, in many cases, they are heroes at their company. There was one company that wanted to add two-factor authentication to their service. They spec'd it out, guessing that it would take about a month of development time to do. One of the engineers went home, looked at the Twilio documentation over the weekend, implemented, and came back in and told everyone, hey, it didn't take a month. It took me a weekend to get this thing basically working. So if you're a company that's selling a product to developers, you're making an API, another way to think about an evangelist is someone who's an ambassador between your company and your company's developers. These are people that will interact with the outside world, come back to the developers inside the company and say, here's what people are asking for, this is what I'm seeing, here's where people are stumbling. They will represent the community to the company and represent the company to the general rest of the community. These are also people who do storytelling. So when you're interacting with a developer, you want someone who can tell a story of your company, not only in speaking, as I'm doing now, or writing, as you're seeing here on the screen, but also through code. Code is what developers write day in and day out. It's how they think, it's how they work. It's a very important part of interacting with a developer. So for the people that are in this type of role, for anyone at your company who's working with the outside world, the thing that an evangelist type of person, an ambassador, needs to really focus on is these parts of these things that you need as part of your API or your product for developers. The clear value proposition, working on the efficient quick starts, and concise and accessible documentations. These are areas that as an evangelist I make the most contributions to Twilio. So I talked about speaking and writing and how it was really important to do code. Let's jump back into some code here. So if Twilio is something that is interesting to you, something that you could use, let me give you a little overview of what you would need to do to integrate with Twilio. So here's Twiml. Twiml is the XML dialect that you use to send responses to Twilio. Here's two example responses. We've got this first one up here. This response will say the words hello world to the person on the other end of the phone line. That's using our text-to-speech engine, so it ends up sounding more like hello world, or something in a more robotic voice like that. The other response here is what you would do to connect a bunch of people into a conference line or a party line, and for every call that you'd make, you'd give Twilio this Twiml saying the way that you're going to deal with this call is connect that person into a conference. Here are all of the different XML tags, the Twiml verbs as we call them, that you will use to respond to Twilio and tell Twilio how to act. We've covered the say verb, that's having us use our text-to-speech engine to say something to the user. Play is what plays audio files. Gather is what gathers button presses from telephones that have touch-tone dialing. Record is pretty self-evident. It's what will record audio, enabling you to do things like make a voicemail system. SMS is what I used in my demo to respond to an SMS with another SMS, but you can even do things like after someone hangs up, having Twilio send them a follow-up SMS saying, you know, fill out the survey about your customer support experience, or here are some links that you might find useful. And then dial is something that is pretty key to what Twilio does. This is what the verb you would use to connect different phones to each other, or connect phones to web browsers or to mobile clients. And the dial verb has these other tags that nest inside of it that we call nouns. So the number noun is what allows you to dial to another telephone number. Client is what lets you to dial out to a web browser or a iOS or Android app. Conference is what allows you to dial somebody into a conference line, and queue allows you to connect them into a call queue. And then on the right here, we've got these secondary verbs that will often take action or modify a primary verb. Take action on or modify a primary verb. The in queue verb here will add somebody into a queue. Leave will disconnect them from it. Hang up is will hang up on the person. It's just what it says. Redirect will tell Twilio, hey, get more responses from me at this URL. So let's say you had somebody, you dialed them to another number, the other end hung up, and then you could have it say, now after that agent hung up, give them a survey at the end of that, or put them back into the top of the phone tree. Reject will reject a call, play them a disconnected tone, and will prevent you from getting billed for calls that you don't want to be billed for. And pause will put a short delay in the text-to-speech engine on the say verb. So that's how to deal with incoming requests. The REST API is what you'll use for outbound requests, for telling Twilio to take action on your behalf. Again, this is a RESTful API that's pure HTTP, and we've got libraries written in all the languages that you see up here. Because my programming language of choice is Python, I'm going to be showing you all of my demos in that language. If you're using a different language, make sure that you go to twilio.com/docs, D-O-C-S, and look for these examples in the programming language of your choice. Now, the one thing to keep in mind here, though, the important part of this slide is the account SID that you see here and the auth token. These are the credentials that you passed to Twilio to authorize yourself with Twilio. And if you're wondering why I didn't need this in my live demo, it's because in the Python library, it'll look for the environment variables, account SID, and auth token, and we'll use those if those exist. This is something that's really useful if you're deploying your code to something like Heroku using Git, because you really shouldn't be checking your credentials into a source code repository like Git. You want to make sure that those don't accidentally end up on GitHub. Here's how to make a phone call using the Python library. The important thing here is the call URL, which you see here at the top. This is how you concatenate 3 strings together in Python. This is a URL to a service that Twilio hosts called Twimlets, and Twimlets are little basic programs that allow you to generate XML for simple types things. As you can see here, and you've probably already guessed, this will play hold music in the type of ambient for the call that you have this run on. So here's how you set up a call. Say create a call to this number from this number, and when this number here answers, take actions from this URL and respond accordingly. Here's how you send an SMS, pretty straightforward. The contents of the SMS are what's here in body. Here's how you list the received SMS messages. This is what I did in that live coding demo. The important part here to focus on is the messages variable. What that is an array of responses that each contain the contents of each message that matches that to filter. And then in the for loop there, you'll see that it'll take each message in that array and print the body attribute of each message response. And here's how you purchase a number. In the live demo, I showed you how to do that through the web interface, but you can also do that through our REST API. The example here is showing you how you would search for an American telephone number in the 530 area code. The next statement there is an if statement saying if there was any response, if there were any contents in that response, purchase the first number, otherwise print that there aren't any numbers available. And that's just a sampling of what you can do via the REST API. Some of the other things that you can do are manipulate conferences and participants, move people around between conference rooms, add people to conferences, remove them from them. You can do things with your accounts and sub-accounts. Sub-accounts are a cool feature that we have to allow you to separate out billing between your different users. So say that you're doing some consulting for someone and don't want to track each and every call that they do and bill them on that basis. If you put them into a sub-account, make a sub-account for them, all of that billing information is still under your main account, but it allows you to see all the activity bucketed by a sub-account. We have an API request to deal with our recordings that allows you to see all of the audio files that have been recorded on your behalf that we stored for you, and list them and delete them and get the URLs for them. Queues and members of queues can be also manipulated similar to conferences. You can move people around in queues, take them from a queue and put them directly to somebody else, or send them to a voicemail, or even ask them to give you input via their touch tone pad, or even give them messages telling them how long their wait in the queue is now. And lastly, all of our client libraries give you the ability to generate XML using a more a paradigm that's closer to what is appropriate in your language. So, creating an object and then handing it to a Twilio creator, because XML is often can be error prone or it's just not fun. We allow you to use whatever paradigm makes sense in your language to build an object, hand it to our Twilio library to then turn that into well-formed XML. So in summary, here's what we talked about today. Here's the high-level overview. Twilio is a service that allows you, the web developer, to easily make and receive phone calls, send and receive SMS messages, all using a simple RESTful API and allowing you to connect to phones, web browsers, and mobile apps on platforms like iOS and Android. Here are the most important things I think that you should take from this talk. No matter what you're doing, focus on continually improving your service. Ship it. Focus on shipping it. The metrics you should be having in mind when you're building a service is how much time does it take for you to get a bug fix from the developer's machine to the live production website. As a developer or someone making a tool for a developer, remember the 5-minute rule, that it should take no more than 5 minutes for a developer to do something useful with your service or your application. And as a developer, you should hold other services to that standard as well. And finally, when you're building a service that is something for developers to use, or a product that developers use, remember to think about that service as empowering others. How can you allow people to do amazing things with your technology? And remember that is a really fulfilling thing to do and a powerful way to interact with your customers. And with that, if you have any questions, you have questions about Twilio or any questions about this presentation, feel free to reach out to me via Twitter. I'm JF on Twitter, or send me an email. I'm joel@twilio.com. Thanks everyone for watching, and I look forward to hearing all the cool things that you're going to do with Twilio. Thanks.